Well, it's because both of you are complete failures as parents that you ended up with a child like this.
With a smug laugh, my mother-in-law, Karen, looked down on me. My husband, Sean, seemed to agree with her, nodding his head repeatedly. I couldn't tolerate anyone insulting my parents like that. I'm cutting all ties with your family, and I'll never see any of your relatives again, I declared, struggling to keep from crying. Sean, with an expression as if he found it amusing, replied,
Fine then, divorce, get out.
All right. I wasn't going to let Karen or Sean win. I clenched my fists tightly in determination. I'm Mary Thompson. I turned 45 this year. 6 months ago, I married Sean, who is my age, and we started living together. I met Sean through a matchmaking service. My mom, worried because I was still single past 40, encouraged me to register with the service. I had always dreamed of a marriage like my parents'. My parents had a love marriage. They were classmates in middle school and have always been close. That's why I wasn't too excited about the idea of meeting someone through a matchmaking service. At first, no one showed interest, and time just dragged on. I was considering quitting when I finally received a proposal for a date from Sean. It was my first arranged date, but I enjoyed my time with Sean. We clicked when we found out we liked the same comics. By the end of the date, we had already planned to meet again. After a few more dates, we started going out. I wouldn't say it was a fiery romance, but it felt comfortable being with him. Apparently, Sean felt the same way, as he eventually proposed. I accepted his proposal. Both of us were busy with work, so we decided to skip a formal wedding. Besides, Sean's father passed away 3 years ago, and his mother, Karen, was reportedly still grieving. Sean felt it wasn't right to have a wedding under those circumstances. I also agreed with Sean's opinion. Instead, we planned a small family dinner after the marriage registration. When I told my parents, they were excited about the dinner gathering. My mom, in particular, was overjoyed.
Finally, Mary's getting married. Stay happy together, just like your dad and I have.
My mom said, beaming with joy. Someday, I want to be part of a close, loving marriage like my parents have. That was the dream I had when I married Sean. A week after registering our marriage, we held a family dinner. That's when I met Karen for the first time, and it turned out to be quite a shock. My parents and I waited at the restaurant. Sean and Karen arrived late. Without any apology for the delay, Karen looked me up and down and sneered.
So, you're the woman who lured my Sean in, huh? You don't look like much. I wonder how you did it.
She let out a mocking laugh through her nose. My mom and I were frozen in shock at how hostile Karen was on our first meeting. My dad quietly glared at Karen. She didn't seem at all like someone who was grieving her late husband. Just then, Sean hurriedly jumped in, saying,
Mom, you're startling Mary. I introduced her to you because I think she's great.
But this woman is already 45, right? What's the point of marrying someone who can't even have children?
Karen replied, as if it were the most obvious thing. Sure, I was past the prime age for having kids, and I hadn't really thought about having any. Sean was her only son, so she was probably hoping for grandchildren. While I struggled to find a response, my dad spoke up.
Aren't you being a bit too rude? Sean is the same age as Mary. You don't have any right to say that.
Even at 45, it's different for men and women. For a man, it's a badge of hard work. But for a woman, it's just being a spinster. We don't need a woman like that in our family.
With that, Karen stood up and left. Sean apologized to my parents, but the atmosphere was unbearably heavy. Looking back, maybe we should have canceled the wedding right then. But Sean and I were already legally married. There was no going back. Could I really get along with someone like Karen? My unease only grew. Since then, I've been dealing with Karen's overbearing behavior. Karen lives close to our apartment, so we're in what you'd call a nearby separate living arrangement. Because of this, she often shows up at our place unannounced.
You're my daughter-in-law, so naturally, you should prioritize me over your own parents.
Just days after the family dinner, Karen barged in and declared this to me. When I tried discussing it with Sean after he came home from work, he let out a big sigh.
Mom just wants you to feel like part of the family. Since you married into the Thompson family, isn't it time you tried to understand that?
But still, as I struggled with my emotions, Sean continued.
To be honest, the fact that you can't have kids has already been a burden on me and my mom. I can't even show my face to my relatives, and it's honestly really embarrassing.
Sean went on and on about how he'd compromised by marrying me. Feeling fed up, I blurted out, "Then maybe you shouldn't have married me. Why didn't you just find a woman your relatives would approve of?" Clearly annoyed, Sean shot back.
Well, it's too late for that now. If I hadn't married you, you'd still be single, right? You should be grateful and start cozying up to my family.
I couldn't care less. Sean's relatives don't matter to me at all. He gave me a look of disbelief.
You can't even handle family relations? What kind of family did you grow up in? You're really lacking in common sense.
After that, he continued to belittle me, calling me a worthless woman. The worst of it all was his final jab.
Well, I thought that as a leftover woman, you'd be grateful and devoted to me, but I totally miscalculated.
Apparently, this was Sean's true opinion. He didn't care for me at all. He just wanted a convenient wife. I couldn't see any happy future in this marriage. I sat there in silence, feeling the sting of frustration, and Sean eventually stormed out. If I could start over, I'd take back this marriage in a heartbeat. But it's been less than a month since we registered, so divorce won't be easy. What should I do? The dream of a happy marriage like my parents was crumbling before my eyes, and I could barely hold back my tears. And so, 3 months have passed since Sean and I registered our marriage. These days have been nothing short of a nightmare. Karen still shows up unannounced, hurling insults at me whenever she feels like it. Just the other day, she appeared while I was preparing dinner, barged into the kitchen, and let out a shriek.
What's with this soup? It looks way too bland. Are you actually serving this to Sean?
Karen then poured a generous amount of seasoning into the pot. I quickly tried to stop her. "Karen, please. This soup has a proper broth base." I intentionally added less seasoning. My mom taught me this recipe. Even when my health-conscious mom was busy with work, she always made sure to prepare balanced meals. Inspired by her, I also aimed to keep our meals low in salt. Sean never complained about my cooking, so I assumed he appreciated it. But Karen didn't get it.
Oh, it's probably just store-bought broth powder anyway. All of them taste the same, right? Soups are better when they're rich.
I make my broth with a variety of ingredients, but apparently Karen sees things differently. Confident in her cooking, she boasted about her own skills, and I couldn't argue back. As she was leaving, Karen commanded, Make sure you prepare a decent meal for the family gathering next time. Got it? After she left, I was flustered. I wasn't aware about any family gathering. When Sean came home, I asked him right away. Karen mentioned a family gathering. What is that about?
Oh, didn't I mention it? Every year on my dad's anniversary, the family gathers for a meal at our house.
What? You never told me that. I was baffled by this new information, but Sean didn't seem to care.
Well, since you're here this year, you should host it for everyone. Mom has always done it on her own, so it only makes sense, right?
His words left me pale. I quickly asked him how many people I needed to cook for and if anyone had food allergies, but he was useless.
How would I know that? If you need details, ask Mom.
When I reluctantly called Karen for help, she was full of disdain.
Only a week before, and you're just asking now? Honestly, this is disgraceful. You're failing as a daughter-in-law.
I managed to get the necessary information from her and hung up. Then, I called my mom and explained the situation to her. She kindly shared some appropriate recipes, which gave me a bit of relief. On the day of the gathering, I started cooking early in the morning. Karen had told me the gathering was at 3 p.m. Our apartment is close to their house, so I decided it would be more efficient to cook at home and then bring the food over, rather than deal with a kitchen I wasn't familiar with. Fortunately, it was a small gathering with only 5 people. I figured I could handle transporting the dishes myself. 3 hours before the event, Sean told me,
I'm heading to my parents' place ahead of time.
"All right, I'll bring the food over soon," I replied, too busy to think much about it. 2 hours before the gathering, I finally finished cooking. There's probably still a lot to do. I'd better head over to Karen's place soon. With the food in hand, I hurried over to their houses nearby. When I arrived, I opened the front door and called out, "Hello." I sensed something odd about the voices coming from inside. It sounded like multiple people were talking. With a sense of dread, I hurried toward the living room. When I opened the door to the living room, an unexpected scene unfolded. Sean was happily drinking a beer. His relatives had already started eating and were chatting and laughing together. When Sean noticed me, he frowned and said,
How long were you planning to keep us waiting? The gathering has already started.
To my disbelief, there were trays of catered appetizers spread out. It was clear they'd ordered takeout. This was entirely different from what Karen and Sean had told me. As I stood there in shock, Karen smirked and said,
Oh, did you actually bring the food you were told to make? What a shame. I went ahead and ordered top-quality appetizers, so we don't need your pathetic cooking.
This food is amazing.
Sean exclaimed, happily digging into the catered dishes. The other relatives were also eating and seemed to be in great spirits. Karen, clearly satisfied, looked at me triumphantly.
Now that you understand, take that sad excuse for a meal and go home. I didn't order anything for you, so you can enjoy it alone at your place.
I made this using a recipe my mom had taught me, I replied, feeling a wave of sadness as if my mom herself had been insulted. I knew it sounded resentful, but I couldn't hold back. Karen, however, seemed furious that I dared to respond.
A daughter-in-law talking back? How disgraceful. Oh, I see. It must be because your parents are failures that they raised such a child,
she said, laughing haughtily. Sean seemed to agree with her, nodding repeatedly.
Your parents looked shabby at the last gathering too, didn't they? No wonder you and your cooking look just as shabby.
Are you seriously saying this? I shot him a glare. Karen chuckled again.
I doubt your parents even have decent jobs, right? A prestigious family like ours has no need for people like you. Shameless.
Insulting my parents was the last straw. I'm cutting all ties with this family. I won't see any of your relatives again, I said, fighting back tears.
How rude. We don't need a woman like you in this family.
The relatives, all seemingly similar in character to Karen, laughed at me. From what I could see, they were all over 70. I thought it was pretty sad to be that age and still be so petty. Just then, a man from the extended family spoke up.
Sean sure married a failure of a wife. Cutting ties with the Thompson family? That's utterly disgraceful. You'll regret it and suffer in the future.
There's no way I'll suffer. I'll never regret today, I responded firmly. There's no way I'm shedding tears over people like them. Sean, as if he found this amusing, sneered.
Fine then, divorce, get out.
Understood. I won't let Karen or Sean defeat me. I clenched my fists tightly. I went straight home and packed up only my essential belongings. I didn't want to leave the food I'd prepared at their house, so I took that with me too. Then I headed to my parents' place. It was about a 30-minute train ride away. When I arrived, my mom came out to greet me.
Welcome home. Your dad's still at work, but did something happen? Weren't you supposed to have a family gathering at Sean's parents' place today?
Mom looked at me with concern. I told her everything that had just happened. Her face showed clear shock. You used the recipe I taught you, the one with all those memories. I'm so sorry it came to this. I handed her the food I'd made. I couldn't eat it all by myself, but it was a recipe my mom had taught me. Plus, I'd heard this dish held special memories for my dad. So I didn't want to just throw it away. Gently, Mom took the food from me.
Let's bring this over to your dad's workplace. I'm sure everyone there will be happy to know you made it.
Thank you. I felt relieved that the meal I'd prepared wouldn't go to waste. Mom and I quickly took the food to my dad's workplace. Everyone was thrilled. It was gone in no time. My dad had just wrapped up some work, so we filled him in together. He was visibly annoyed by the story.
If they treated you that badly, I won't stand for it. Mary, you're not going back to him.
That's right. We're on your side, so don't worry about anything.
Dad, Mom, thank you so much. It was reassuring to hear my parents say that. I felt grateful to them. That evening, after Dad finished his work, the three of us headed home. Being back at my parents' place was incredibly comforting. That night, I listened to my parents share stories of how they first met. Watching them together, so happy and in love, I realized that a marriage based on compromise was never worth it. The next day, I began the steps toward divorce. I met with a lawyer my dad recommended and explained everything. The lawyer sent a certified letter by express mail to Sean's house and his parents' home. Sean called me repeatedly, but I ignored every call. I didn't want to be his convenient option any longer. I felt a renewed sense of determination. 3 days later, I started getting more calls from Sean than ever. He must have seen the contents of the certified letter sent by my lawyer. Karen, too, was calling incessantly. Knowing it would just interfere with work if I kept ignoring them, I finally answered Sean's call. What do you want?
What's with this certified letter? Are we really getting divorced?
His voice sounded tearful, a complete change from his confident tone just 3 days ago. He must have thought I'd forgive him if he showed weakness. You're the one who wanted a divorce, remember? So I've hired a lawyer. From now on, please go through the law office. I replied calmly, and his tone immediately shifted.
You're feeling smug just because I'm being civil? Get back here and apologize.
I'm not apologizing. This is your fault, remember? Clearly, he wasn't remorseful at all. It sounded like Karen was there with him too.
Don't you dare ignore us. I'm coming over right now so we can settle this in person.
Karen shouted, her voice filled with anger.
Yeah, that's right. If we're getting divorced, pay me some compensation. You wasted my time.
I sighed at Sean's ranting. This wasn't going anywhere, and it'd be better to settle things quickly. Fine, let's talk in person, I said, giving Sean my parents' address. 30 minutes later. Thanks for going out of your way to come here, I said to Sean and Karen as they arrived in front of my family's home. My parents stood behind me. My dad had managed to adjust his work schedule on short notice. Of course, I had no intention of letting Sean or Karen inside. I planned to end this conversation right here. Sean and Karen stared, dumbfounded, at the house.
It's not bigger than my parents' place.
Sean muttered. Our family home was more than 3 times the size of his parents' house, so his surprise was understandable. Karen looked equally taken aback.
It's huge. What kind of work does your family do?
Our family has been running a general hospital for generations. Ever heard of Brooks Hospital?
Brooks Hospital?
Karen shrieked, her voice almost a screech, and Sean flinched in surprise.
Mom, what's with you all of a sudden? You scared me.
He said, but Karen didn't hear him. She was still reeling.
Brooks Hospital. That's a well-known hospital in this area.
I figured you'd know it. I would be a little worried if you didn't. It's where everyone in town goes. My family, in fact, came from a long line of doctors. My dad was the hospital director, and my mom worked as his assistant. And of course, I'm a doctor too. But since my dad encouraged me to focus on my marriage, I currently only handle outpatient cases. I get along well with the doctors and nurses at work. Because of that, everyone was happy to enjoy the homemade treats I brought in. As I explained this, Karen's face turned pale.
Everyone goes to Brooks Hospital when they're unwell. Even our relatives probably go there. I've heard it has top-rated doctors.
Oh, you mean my dad? I responded promptly. In his younger days, Dad had gone overseas to hone his skills. While my mom raised me on her own, he worked tirelessly alone. As a result, he's become highly skilled in surgery. Now, patients come from all over the country seeking his expertise.
I had no idea he was that renowned.
Sean said in a strained voice. At the very least, it's not some measly job, right? My dad earns quite a bit more than you. Actually, your annual salary is probably about the same as his monthly income.
Gosh.
Sean's face twisted in frustration. He'd belittled my family, calling them measly. I wasn't about to forgive that so easily. So, what exactly did you mean by measly? I asked, looking straight at Sean. Now that he knew the truth about my family, Sean was left stammering, unable to respond. If we're talking clothes, my dad's outfits are way better than yours. I mean, your clothes aren't even branded, right?
What? But I paid a lot for this at a vintage store.
Sean muttered, trying to believe his outfit was worth something. You were probably ripped off. I saw it online for 15 bucks. Sean, not only do you look shabby, but you have poor taste too.
What? Shut up.
His face turned bright red, but he couldn't argue back. Next, I turned to Karen. She remained silent, so I decided to speak up. Karen, it looks like you might end up in a shabby position too.
What?
She looked puzzled, not understanding. I decided to spell it out for her. Well, since neither you nor any of your relatives will be able to visit our hospital again, you might find yourself frantically searching for another place when you need medical care. That might wear you out a bit.
Wait, what do you mean?
Even now, Karen didn't fully understand. It was time to let her fall into the realization. I smiled brightly at Karen, who was visibly shaken, and delivered my message. You called my parents failures, right? You wouldn't want to trust your life to such failures, would you? You and your family don't need to come to our hospital again.
This can't be.
Karen, filled with despair, collapsed weakly to the ground. We were talking outside the house, so the ground was dirty. But she didn't seem to care, just sat there, pale and staring down. Sean immediately jumped in to protest.
That's way out of line with my mom. And can a hospital even choose its patients?
I was furious at their attitude, as if they'd done nothing wrong. Had Sean forgotten how Karen looked down on my parents? Karen was the one who insulted my parents first. None of your relatives stood up for me. There are community hospitals nearby. You can go there instead. Sean fell silent at my response. Besides, since Karen claims not to be shabby like we are, she wouldn't choose our hospital anyway. A community hospital might be just the high-class environment she's looking for. I addressed Karen directly, and she let out a pained sound.
The local hospital has outdated equipment, and the food is terrible. That's why everyone goes to Brooks Hospital, with its modern facilities and delicious meals. Don't be so cruel.
Just then, my mom spoke up.
Our food is shabby, isn't it? We have a dietitian overseeing the meals at Brooks Hospital, and I personally check them too. You might want to avoid such shabby food.
My mom was smiling, but her eyes were ice cold. That's right, Mom. Karen's been saying how shabby we are, especially at that last dinner. Karen and Sean, realizing I knew all about their previous comments, looked shocked.
I will.
What should we do, Mom?
Both of them looked completely defeated, their faces pale. At that moment, my dad spoke up.
I'll never forgive anyone who hurts my daughter. Our hospital is permanently off limits to you and your family. Find somewhere else to care.
Karen was startled by my dad's angry voice. As the hospital director, his word is final. Karen seemed to understand that, burying her head in her hands.
What am I supposed to do if I get sick?
Mom, do something.
Karen began to cry. She must have realized the seriousness of what she'd done. But it was too late for regrets. And Sean, even in this situation, could do nothing but rely on Karen. Watching Sean desperately cling to Karen, I couldn't help but feel how truly pathetic he was. Just then, Karen seemed to have an idea.
That's it. If you're getting divorced, you need to pay me alimony. You must have money, don't you?
Sean's face lit up.
Yeah, consider it a breakup fee. Hand it over now.
He demanded, holding out his hand. I let out a deep sigh and replied firmly, "There's no way I'm paying alimony. Feel free to take it up with my lawyer." Realizing he wouldn't get any money, Sean looked to Karen for help. I was done with this man. I turned to him, who was still clinging to Karen. "Oh, by the way, I changed the name on the lease for our apartment to yours, Sean."
What? What are you talking about?
"You know, that luxury high-rise you live in. The rent is $3,000 a month. Since I'm moving out after the divorce, you'll have to start covering it next month." Sean let out a pained groan.
What? $3,000? My entire paycheck would go to rent. I can't afford that.
"Not my problem. I've been paying for it all this time. I'm leaving, so it's only fair that whoever stays there pays for it, right? Hey, it's a luxury apartment, perfect for someone as refined as you." I replied sarcastically. My mom laughed beside me.
My shabby daughter will be living here, although this place is many times the size of that apartment.
Dad piled on.
Mary's been covering most of the living expenses too, not just rent. I bet your lifestyle will take a hit.
Sean looked up at my dad, his face desperate.
No way. You mean I won't get to eat Mary's cooking anymore?
Karen looked at him in confusion. I spoke up, turning to Karen. "By the way, my shabby cooking uses organic vegetables from high-end stores and quality ingredients. It's actually pretty delicious."
But Mom's cooking is awful. What are we supposed to do now?
My cooking is awful?
Karen looked devastated. It's understandable. Being told by her own son that his wife's cooking is better must have hurt. Both of them stood there in shock. I was sure they'd end up self-destructing if I left them alone. Ignoring their desolate faces, I turned to my parents. "Dad, Mom, it's cold out here. Shall we go inside?" Without a glance at Karen and Sean, we walked into the house. After that, Sean and I got divorced. It wasn't easy. It had turned into a major battle because Sean changed his mind and begged not to go through with it. We ended up in a meeting at the lawyer's office. Just the five of us, my parents, me, Sean, and Karen.
Please don't go through with the divorce. I really like that apartment. And my mom lives there now too.
Apparently, right after I moved out, Karen had settled into the apartment. It's a nice place, with a concierge and a spacious, pristine entrance. I replied firmly, "If you like it so much, you can keep paying the rent yourself, Sean."
I can't afford $3,000 in rent every month. Please come back.
And anyway, our family home is on leased land. In 5 years, we'll have to tear down the house and return it.
What? What does that mean?
Sean looked visibly shaken by Karen's sudden admission. It turned out that their so-called prestigious family status was a thing of the past. Ever since their great-grandfather's company went bankrupt, it seems they've been living no differently from an average household.
I had no idea.
Sean muttered, looking completely shocked. My parents and I could only shake our heads in disbelief. After that, Sean tried clinging to me, but I refused. With some persuasion from my lawyer, Sean finally agreed to the divorce. After a while, I heard that Sean and Karen were evicted from the apartment. Apparently, they had continued to miss rent payments. They moved back to Sean's family home, but in 5 years, the house will have to be demolished, and they'll be left with nothing. On top of that, they're responsible for the demolition costs. Since Karen is living on her pension, Sean will have to shoulder the expense. It's going to be a painful hit for him. Karen and her relatives are also facing hardship. After that, Karen was diagnosed with an illness. It's a difficult condition that, in this area, only my dad could treat. She tried reaching out for our help, but I refused. I'm sure you don't want to rely on the care of failed parents, right? Besides, we're no longer family. If you show up at our hospital, you'll be charged for every penny of the hospital stay. Red-faced, Karen retorted angrily.
Fine. I don't need the help of quacks like you.
That's just perfect. Please don't ever appear in front of me again. With a look of frustration, Karen walked away. She went to another hospital, but I heard her condition hasn't improved. Sean, like Karen, came begging as well.
We're family after all. Help my mom. Get her the best private room, free of charge, of course.
I heard that Sean racked up a huge amount of debt to cover the overdue rent. Then his company found out about the debt, and he was forced to resign. Now he has no money at all. There's no way treatment can be free. Please leave. I'm busy with work. Since Sean wouldn't stop making a scene, I had security escort him out. Watching his behavior, I was truly glad I divorced him. Later, I heard that even the other relatives were facing backlash. Apparently, word has spread that anyone associated with them won't be able to get admitted to our hospital. Because of this, they're being avoided by the neighbors. I'm sure they're all worried that their turn is coming next. People's bad deeds eventually catch up to them. For Karen, Sean, and their family, I hope this has been a valuable lesson. 2 years have passed since then. I'm working full-time now. With night shifts as well, it keeps me pretty busy. But I'm much happier than I was when I was married. One reason for that is a wonderful new person in my life. I was introduced to him by my dad. He works as a pharmaceutical sales representative for Medgen assigned to this hospital.
Apparently, he's been interested in you for a while. He's a good guy, so maybe consider giving him a chance.
He's 2 years younger than me and has been focused on his career, never really having time for a relationship. He treats me with genuine respect and sincerity. I'm starting to develop feelings for him, especially since he reminds me a bit of my dad. My mom was thrilled when she heard about him.
You absolutely should marry someone you love. I'm cheering for you.
We aren't officially dating yet, but I hope to take things slowly and see where it leads. If I can build a relationship as warm and happy as my parents, nothing would make me happier. I'm hopeful about what the future holds.